Was there any groundbreaking, most important advice you've been given from one of your colleagues that resonated with you and that you would like to share with young filmmakers debuting at this year's Berlinale? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I immediately think of my beginning, and that means of Derek Jarman. I think I learned more from him, not just because I was a young person, but because he was, in a way, a great teacher. I think all of us who worked with him, who were young, and many of us were very young, who worked with him, learned everything that we have been able to learn, really, there in our kind of kindergarten years. And so what particularly did he teach me? Well, I once said flippantly, but I realize it was really true, you know, hold your own light and, I mean, literally hold your own light and be prepared not to sleep. That was very good advice, and that stood me in very good stead. Some filmmakers I work with don't ask me to hold my own light, but I'm ready, always ready to hold my own light, and sometimes to hold the camera as well. That feeling of self-determination is what he taught us. Look after your own work and bring it to the party. And he really, I remember the first films that I made with him were not only my first films, but were the first films, for example, of Sandy Powell, the great costume designer who went on to work many times with Martin Scorsese and Todd Haynes and countless other people. Her first film was my first film, and she would sit here beside me and I'm sure say similar things. He taught us how to be filmmakers. I think that's what I would say, encourage young filmmakers of any description to know that we are all filmmakers. People holding the boom, that's a filmmaker. A script supervisor is a filmmaker. A performer is a filmmaker. Actually, even someone in the craft services is actually making a film, and we are dependent on them to keep us nourished. This is really, I think, something that we learned and is a very, very important thing to remember because it keeps you webbed together. I have actually, when people talk about me working in the industry, I always find it quite amusing because I'm not an industrial animal by nature. I'm very pre-industrial, in fact. But when I have had these sort of strange forays into industrial filmmaking, which I've enjoyed very much because it's very exotic for me. It's like, that's my experimental work, is when I have been, the few times I've worked in the big studio systems. The one thing I've noticed is how the industrial system divides people up into their departments, and it's very difficult for them very often to relate to one another because they're kept away from each other. And speaking as a performer, that's something that I've noticed is particularly sharp. Industrial performers in industrial films are kept in hutches. I always say, if I have a trailer, I say I'm going back to my hutch because it feels that way. And you're not necessarily, not welcome on the set, but it's assumed that you don't want to be on the set when you're not actually in front of the camera. And I love being on the set. I'm always hanging out with my friends when we're setting up a shot. And I've noticed in the industrial films that I've made that that is peculiar. And people, originally, they're a little suspicious about it, but then they begin to see that it's actually quite nice having people hanging around and being, in a collective communication. So I think just stick together, keep together, don't get cut up.